Thank you so much, Professor Puri, for your great presentation. Very informative, very key point orientated. There's just a little improvement in the microbiological word. We say pleomorphic forms. The cyst is a former expression by Lyda Mettmann, and we brought out a paper with a Finnish university, and it's better to say, by acceptance, to say pleomorphic forms. And this includes all the cystic forms, round bodies, L forms, etc. But it was such a great presentation. Thank you for this input for me too. It's a known unknown. We're discussing about chameleon. You talked about before. It's a known unknown bacteria. We know a little about the endogeneity is completely different from syphilis infection. Syphilis is much easier to catch, but not Borrelia burgdorferi. It's so complicated, the genetic structure of Borrelia burgdorferi. It remains difficult to culture it. Why? Because of the small numbers, because of the slow growth of the organism. It needs special culture media, and it can take up to 10, 11 months to culture Borrelia burgdorferi, and that's too long. If you have a heart problem, you cannot wait 11 months for diagnosis. Cultures have rarely been positive in knee fluid and CSF, and there are no tests actually to determine the susceptibility pattern for different antibiotics. That's also very critical to find out which antibiotics is possible to give in Borrelia burgdorferi infections actually. The PCR is also a big problem. PCR is a good method. It's a Nobel Prize winning method, but the polymerase chain reaction amplifies just a small traces of bacterial DNA, and the sensitivity is just 5 up to 25% in actual practice. The low sensitivity in the bloodstream is hardly discussed. Is it really in the bloodstream? What about the correlation with dark field microscopy? I think we have low level of spirochetes in the blood. The question is, the primers are the correct one for the PCR. Maybe you have a lack of spirochetemia. We have a transient spirochetemia, and the presence of PCR inhibitors is also a problem during the PCR technique. So we have also the potential of false positive results for PCR. PCR is the gold standard, but for Borrelia burgdorferi, actually not. So what to do? We have to look at different aspects, the principles of immune defense. An invader is coming into your blood, and this invader is recognized by the macrophages. The macrophages present this invader to the natural killer cells on this side. Therefore, we look at the CD57 count, if it's suppressed or not. And the macrophage presents this Borrelia burgdorferi antigen also to the TH0. It's the original stem cell, and then there's a differentiation of the TH0 cell into TH1 and TH2 system. I go back. TH1 is the T cell, and we have memory cells and effector cells, and the TH2 cell is responsible for the antibody production, and it builds complexity, and then you have the histamine at the end, and each system is able to destroy Borrelia burgdorferi, each system of it. The natural killer cell, the TH1 system, and the TH2 system. But what about now these cytokine profiles? I think we all think the next step will be to do more cytokine profiles in infections and maybe other diseases. We have the TH0 cell, and the TH0 cell, it splits into the TH1 system and the TH2 system. And each system has a different cytokine profile. Typically, you all heard about the interferon gamma release, and that's also the LTT test, the ELISpot test I will talk about later. And the TH2 system are the interleukin 10, interleukin 4, interleukin 5, and also this complexity of the macrophages and the Borrelia also produces some cytokine profiles. So we are convinced that in the nearest future there will be more and more science on cytokine profiles and also better diagnostic tests also for the LTT test they are developing actually. What are the influences now of the TH1 cells? The TH1 cells are the T lymphocytes, and they have a correlation with tuberculosis that's known with ME, CFS, with HIV infection, with Candida infection, with hepatitis C, with leaky gut syndrome, with multiple allergies, also with septical processes, with Gulf War I syndrome, and also with bacteria like Borrelia and other bacteria and viruses. But if you have this overreaction of the Th1 cell system, the T cells, then you also can produce rheumatoid arthritis, you can develop multiple sclerosis symptoms and Hashimoto's, for example. What to do now in diagnostic tests? That's my specialty. We know everybody is looking for antibodies. That's very traditional. You know the HIV test development, beginning of the 80s, the hepatitis C afterwards and B. But you're just looking for the Th2 system, and what we are doing, or the CDC is recommending for the CDC is the law for the whole world. The CDC makes the laws for the whole world. And they tell everybody you have to screen Borrelia burgdorferi infections by an ELISA, a simple ELISA technique. It's not so cost expensive, you have low costs on it, but the problem of this ELISA is the antigenity and also the subspecies of Borrelia burgdorferi. We have now a brand new one, the Miyamotoi. It's a hard discussion, could we detect Miyamoto subspecies by an ELISA? I cannot answer the question. There are no studies about it. We have to ask the test producers. We have to ask the universities. The sera are screened actually by CDC criteria, these American criteria, not European criteria, not for our subspecies. And the CDC criteria were developed not for routine analysis, just for scientific purpose, but they use all the ELISA now for Borrelia burgdorferi for routine analysis. That's completely wrong strategy. I don't understand this. In a second step, if you are positive by ELISA, then you are allowed to do an immunoplot. But the problem is the immunoplot actually has more antigens on it, more subspecies on it, and it's more sensitive than the ELISA. So it's the more specific antisensitive test. So in my eyes, ELISA actually, it should be forbidden. It should be absolutely forbidden because the misdiagnosis is there. Doctors exclude. Many of the doctors I know, they exclude by negative ELISA Lyme disease, and that's not possible. That means you have a high risk cases of positive immunoplot, but negative ELISA. I will show you such a case now. That was a patient of mine, completely negative in the ELISA. It was 2.8, it's negative. The reference range is 16, and the results were lower. But the immunoplot was full of antigen bands for Borrelia burgdorferi. So if you just allow the ELISA, this patient is misdiagnosed, negative, excluded. And the doctors will not tell they're crazy, but they control ELISA. They have suspicion for Borrelia burgdorferi infection but they all say ELISA must be positive. But this is a test just for research purpose. It's no test for routine analysis. So you understand this point, or some questions? I think that's very, very important. Don't believe the ELISA test for Borrelia. It's completely different if you do hepatitis C or HIV infection, completely different. And then we speak about sensitivity, false negativity. And you see here an overview of a lot of literature about that. And we have an average of sensitivity, it's around 43%. So 6 of 10 patients are misdiagnosed by Borrelia burgdorferi ELISA. Believe me, that's the truth. And the average of specificity, that means the right results, specific results, over 99%. So if you have a positive ELISA or immunoplot, then it's surely proven, like IGeneX and other laboratories do the test, you suffer from chronic Lyme disease. We're not speaking about the differences of recent infections and chronic infections. It's also a chapter we can discuss half a day. And there are a lot of studies about that. In the case, just 3 studies, in the case of ELISA positive or borderline results were observed in only 24 patients. That was a study from Poland, February 2011, just 50% sensitivity. That's independent from my studies or other studies we did. Another study was in 2010. 32 patients had specific anti-Borrelia antibodies confirmed using Western blot despite a negative ELISA. In patients with persisting difficulties, it is necessary to use the Western blot test. It is probably due to the very low production of specific antibodies caused also by immune deficiency status detected in all our patients. This group is very interesting because they talked about immune class subdeficiencies. And we know that chronic infections do this. You have not the chance to produce IgG or IgM. So you have a lack of antibodies in your body in general, a secondary IgG1 and IgG3 subclass deficiency. You can measure it by modern methods. It's no problem. So think of this point too. And interestingly, if you treat the patients, they develop antibodies again because the subclass deficiency improved. And you will say, yes, it's correct. And Joe Borrascano, he used also IgG intravenously for good therapy results to substitute the IgG because the IgG is very low in such patients. So look for IgG and subclass deficiencies. It's not my slides. The next study was about the standardization. The tests are not standardized. The number of IgM and or IgG positive ELISA results range from 34 up to 59% in this study. The comparison of immunoplots yielded large difference in inter-test agreement. So there's no standardization of the test. If you send to laboratory A, immunoplot is positive and the other laboratory is negative. Also with the same test, I had such results. It's not standardized, you know. There's no standardization. Why? Subspecies problem, antigen problem, maybe secondary IgG problem. Or also concentration problems, I don't know. Also, in this study, some immunoplots gave positive results in samples that had been tested negative by all 8 ELISAs. They did 8 ELISA test producers and all negative, but the immunoplot was positive by just 1 test producer. Here we are. So what about standardization? Next problem. You have the NHS, you have responsible, Tim is responsible here in your country for it. He should standardize this. That would be the first postulation from the scientific side. So the next point is you lose sensitivity if you use just the ELISA. You have a loss of sensitivity in comparison with the immunoplot. Immunoplot is the main name for immunoplot technique, and if you use Western blot, that's also correct. You can use also Northern blot or Western blot or Eastern blot or Southern blots. These are different techniques. We are living here in the Western parts. If you do analysis in Russia, you would use an Eastern blot, for example. So we all talk about Western blots because we have the dominant structures here in Europe. You know the difference, it's a technique difference. But talk Western blots, the same variation of immunoblot doesn't matter. I talked about the more specific immunoblot is the more sensitive test. Very important to know. The ELISA is completely senseless. Don't do it. Only a Borrelia immunoblot should be done for screening tests. That's very important. So there's a lot of literature behind. If you're interested, you could get the slides about immunoplot ELISA evidence-based literature on false seronegativity in chronic Lyme disease. Not speaking about recent infections. Also Klempner is here on some papers, and Stier, you talked about these guys. IgM, what about IgM? If you get a recent infection, you produce IgM. But that's not in Lyme disease, that might be, or not, or you jump over the IgM and you do produce the IgG. Everything is possible. It's a chameleon, it's a known unknown. There's evidence that an IgM Western blot or immunoblot response can last longer than 6 months in chronic Lyme disease. There's studies behind. From Stier, the IgM levels rose during exacerbations and fell during remission for up to 18 months after treatment. EM means bullseye rash. 56% of patients with early Lyme disease had detectable IgM responses to the spirochete 6 months or later. The serum IgM levels correlated directly with disease activity, and the persistence of specific IgM antibodies may also be associated with more severe disease. So if you have a persistent IgM without IgG, this can be a sign for chronic Lyme disease. And then I go to Australia, and they told me, it's unspecific. But the patients are suffering from Lyme typical symptoms, so it's not unspecific, it's very specific for the disease, you know. We first do the anamnesis, the symptomatology, Professor Puri showed you a lot about, and then you do the test. You don't do a test for screening everybody here, because many of us, we will, I think 26 up to 30%, all of you will have some antibodies, and then you ask me, and Professor Puri or Breakspear, am I sick now? I feel pretty well, and then we have a big discussion about using antibiotics like Rocephin with you. So the prediction of a laboratory result is so good or such good, you do the anamnesis for a patient. It's every time the same. I want to show you now a case report that's fitting to your multiple sclerosis. I had 10 years ago a 43-year-old patient suffering since May 2005 from persistent paresthesia of the left leg, 80% blindness of the left eye, progressive myalgia, recurrent dizziness, substantial loss of power during her work, sorry, that was a mistake, a high threat, that's very important, high threat of occupation disability. The costs for chronic Lyme are enormous. You cannot imagine what are the follow-up costs for the healthcare system and the social system. It's a catastrophe. I don't want to know the number, otherwise I go home. But the diagnosis for this patient, the diagnosis was multiple sclerosis. So, if you're clever, left leg, left eye, where was the tick bite? On the left side. Come later to that point. The spinal fluid and the laboratory tests were all negative for Borrelia. The antibodies in the spinal fluid negative, no IgG synthesis in form of oligoclonal bands in the spinal fluid. Everything was negative. And then the neurologists, they exclude Lyme disease. If everything's negative, no Lyme disease, go home, you're suffering from multiple sclerosis. But what's multiple sclerosis? I did in this case, also the antibodies were negative, immunoblot negative also. I did a special test, I will show you later, 10 years ago. And the therapy was corticosteroids in this case, and the symptoms got worse. Working disability, patient nearly blind, worse. And bad side effects of corticosteroids. Don't forget the discussion about risk-benefit ratio in each therapy we have to do. I did this LTT, lymphocyte transformation test, 2005. I was so critical about that test, you cannot imagine, because I thought T cells, what to do with T cells? I'm looking for antibodies, not for T cells that time. I worked for a big laboratory, the SYNLAB group, and the CD57 count was 65 per microliter. Here are the results of this LTT test, was done by the SYNLAB group, cooperating. It was a high lymphocyte transformation test for Borrelia burgdorferi antigens, and also CD57 natural killer cells were suppressed. So that time I was really critical, and I told the doctor, and the immunoplot negative, you see here, I told the doctor, yeah, maybe could be Lyme disease. I'm not so sure because I'm not experienced in the LTT or now ELISpot. But this patient was treated with Rocephin, and 8 weeks after therapy, she was completely symptom-free, completely. The MS was cured, was gone till nowadays, 10 years. Everything fine. So I don't want to struggle. And after the therapy, it was a low CD57 count improved, and the ELISpot was also lower. So successful therapy. But what was the correct diagnosis? We can struggle about that. We can say, oh, this patient had multiple sclerosis, is now cured for 10 years. Or what in my eyes was the correct diagnosis, it was a chronic neuroborreliosis with multiple sclerosis-like symptoms. And then I think we could agree with the neurologist, I hope so. And the spinal tap has a poor sensitivity in chronic neurological Lyme disease. I do a warning, don't do it diagnosed by spinal fluid, it's too dangerous for the patient, the risks are there. There's a study from STEER also, they did 27 patients with neurological Lyme disease presenting to in the medicine of Boston University, and just one of the 27 patients had antibodies to Lyme disease. And Professor Reiber, I don't know if you know Professor Puri, you know Professor Hans-Otto Reiber, he is the father of this scheme of the antibody tests in spinal fluid. I've talked with him and he said it's a catastrophe, the standardization in the spinal fluid, very, very difficult, the concentration in relation with the serum conditions, so very, very difficult. So here we are, we have the natural killer cells. Natural killer cells are very important in chronic inflammatory processes. They are responsible for the lysis antigen antibodies complexes, and we have the Th1 system. We look nowadays more for the LTT. LTT is the ELISpot LTT. It belongs to the lymphocyte transformation test. It's a modern variation. It's a standardized variation. We look also for chlamydia pneumoniae, very important. It's my favorite, number one. Anaplasma ehrlichia and some others. And we also look for antibodies, but just by screening tests. I think the antibodies are very difficult to tell us the story about activity in your body of a lot of diseases. And we look for antibodies for chlamydia, mycoplasma. They are very established, the test. So now I want to tell a little bit about the B cells. The B cells are responsible for the production of antibodies. And that's what the immunoplot looks like. That's a good technique, but it has borderline restrictions. You have here the different bands, and very important is the VLSE band. It's coming from recombinant antigens. It brings you a little higher sensitivity, up to 20. I think that's a difference to the ELISA, 20-30%. It's from recombinant, means you do it genetically produced. The culture tests are, for example, the OSPC. And here you have a broad-ranged panel of bands. And also the P31 band is not included. You talked about that point too. It should be included. For me, very important to do the VLSE in the immunoplot. The VLSE is highly specific, associated with in vivo activity. Professor Blenk from Euromed Clinic in Nuremberg, friend of mine, he did a lot of studies with C6 ELISA and VLSE titer to do an ELISA for it, but he didn't come through against the diagnostic companies and industries. The problem is not the specificity of the bands. If you have Borrelia bands in your body, you had contact or you have contact to Borrelia burgdorferi, but the sensitivity is the problem. So the false negative results, I think about 40%, 50% are false negative, and they suffer really from chronic Lyme, so you cannot exclude it. That's explanation for recombinant antigens that are not expressed in the cultures. Nowadays, we do combination of both in modern immunoplots. We do a combination of recombinant antigens and native antigens. That's the best to reach a higher test sensitivity, but it's not standardized too. Don't trust also these results. The clinical aspects are dominating the laboratory results. So that's my heart now. I'm presenting you my heart. And these are the T cells. 10 years ago, I started with this multiple sclerosis patient, no antibodies, and that was the beginning of my history with these T cells. And then I got more and more convinced of the T cell diagnostic test. The lymphocyte transformation test, or the ELISpot technique, is, I think, a very good technique. It's not proving, but it's helpful. That's Dr. Leo Josten from Radboud University. He worked on a special technique too from on the monocytes by Boulder Diagnostics. He was asked some months ago, what solutions that are currently being pursued do you believe hold the most promise for diagnosing Lyme disease at a high level, confidence level? It's what tests currently available to the general public other than Western blot tests do you believe provide a better degree of certainty? And he said at the moment, his answer, there are cellular-based tests on the market, LTT and ELISpot, although it's the same, are a few of these tests. These tests give us information about the cellular immune response towards Borrelia antigens. It seems that these tests will be used in the future apart from serological tests. That's a scientist, a professor independently from me discussing or caring for it. About the working principle of ELISpot. The ELISpot is a standardized technique. We take blood from you, or your doctor takes the blood, and then we isolate your lymphocytes. We put it on a well. On the well are the different antigens. It's a standardized technique. You could do it for other bacteria and viruses too in universities. And then you put a substrate on it, and you incubate the whole complex. And then there is a specific cell release of cytokines or profiles or not. That's the important question in this technique. After that, you do in ELISA technique by a double antibody, and then you add streptavidin enzyme conjugate. That's for the ELISA technique, and then you find either these spots or not. Each spot you see here was a living T cell in your blood fighting against Borrelia or some other antigens. What you want to can do it, chlamydia, Yersinia, EBV, CMV. This is standardized technique. You could do also cytokine profiles. Now we want to do also some other bacteria. Bartonella would be very interesting to get such a technique too for the T cells. So this patient was really sick. And what about the antigens? That's always a very important question. If you don't have the antigen in the test system, you cannot find out. If you don't have the subspecies, you cannot find out. That's very important. In the ELISpot, we have the full antigen. It's a B31 reference strain from Borrelia burgdorferi sensu stricto. We have a peptide mix antigens, the second one. We, inside by the test, not by me, the test producer do it. They have OSPA, outer surface membrane protein A, from Borrelia burgdorferi sensu stricto, Afzelia, very important, Garinii. You heard about the three main subspecies, OSPC native and DBPA recombinant. So we have, that's a more the neurological mixture we have here for Garinii. Here you have more the sensu stricto for the joints, and very important for me also the LFA1. What's about LFA1? We could do also another session about. It's a lymphocyte function antigen 1, very important in rheumatological diseases. That's the own body protein and a combination with sensu stricto. We name it shared epitope. If you ask some rheumatologists, they know it, but just a few of them. It's very often associated with autoimmune diseases. Very often, collagenoses, rheumatoid arthritis, vasculitis. So if you find a positive LFA1 in the ELISpot, you always should do the ANA, CCP antibodies and ANCA for vasculitis. And in many cases, you will find some autoimmune disorders in such patients, and also Hashimoto. This is about the ELISpot technique now in stage 1. You see the ELISA had here a sensitivity for 45% in some patients, but the ELISpot had 75% in this study, nearly 80% sensitivity. ECM means erythema chronicomicrans, bullseye rash, very easy explanation. So you see the sensitivity in this study was better for ELISpot than for the antibodies by ELISA. Why? Because if you get a tick bite, first not the antibodies will come into this process in your skin. First the T cell invasion will start. The T cells are moving and there's a high T cell production. So you do immediately after a tick bite, it makes sense to do the ELISpot and not the antibodies. The antibodies need 10 days, 14 days, or they will never happen. And if you are treated by doxycycline, I forgot to say, doxycycline block the production from IgM to IgG. So you have to ask each patient, did you get doxycycline in your therapy? Doxycycline is good against Ehrlichia infections, anaplasma too. But if you don't have an IgG, the zero conversion it's named, you don't have it, then it could be the IgM that you are still on the IgM level in this case, and no IgG production by the doxycycline therapy. So you have to ask if you find an isolated IgM also for doxycycline therapies before by your GP, for example. So what about the advantages of this ELISpot? The ELISpot is very helpful in the actual activity, or let's say current activity. It's better to express current activity. The B cells, the antibody titer, persists over years. It will not change in many cases. But the T cells, they have a half-life time, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and then after successful therapies, it should be negative, the results. Also, I showed you in this multiple sclerosis patient before. So what about this point? If the LTT stays high, that means it's unsuccessful, or you need some more therapies. But if the LTT or ELISpot or ELISpot is going down, then the patient should feel better. And also the IMD, Professor von Beer, did a lot of studies about this. There are also studies behind. I'll show you later. So you can use this ELISpot in chronic Lyme disease to look before and after treatment. You do a basic result, and then you treat a patient, and normally 6 up to 8 weeks after successful treatment, it should be 0 or lower. These are all patients showing you some of success, or here is one patient, number 5 without success. So the LTT is going higher. So your therapy was something wrong, or maybe a co-infection. I don't know about this case. The ELISpot belongs to the, if you're interested in laboratory medicine, interferon gamma release assays. So we measure gamma interferon release. And they are also, interestingly, the CDC. They told us this T cell spot, this interferon gamma release assay, is approved by the FDA. They say in their paper, but just for tuberculosis, not for Borrelia and other things, but for tuberculosis, it's a gold standard for them. A positive result suggests that an infection is likely. A negative result suggests that an infection is unlikely. It's original paper, I could mail you. The results, and it's a very quick test, the results can be available within 24 hours or let's say 2 days. It's a very perfect test system. There's a new group also in Sweden. They showed that the ELISpot specificity in neuroborreliosis was 82%. And another study was done by children, and they found that also it's a very high sensitivity in the test. And there's a new group in USA, it's the Advanced Laboratories. No, not Advanced. They do the iSpot technique. And they said they did studies, the sensitivity of the ELISpot is estimated at 84%, and specificity is around 94%. So the ELISpot assay is a robust, highly reproducible test, and the ELISpot can be retested to gain additional information in follow-up assays. But they say also the two assay system, ELISpot plus CD57 count, complement each other in the quest to understand T-cell mediated immunity in vivo. That is where I came from. So you have to do both tests actually to come to a higher test sensitivity in the combination. I'll show you later on my slides. This study was done, according to this study, we have specificity of the test 82 up to 100%, and sensitivity is 84%. So you say 84% is a bad sensitivity, but it's much better than the immunoblot with just 60%. So maybe it's better just to do the ELISpot. I don't know, we can discuss also later. There's a lot of literature and more coming about the LTT in this T-cellular. Look, Siegel studied in 1984. We have now a new study 2014. We have von Beer from 2012. We have a lot of studies about more and more the T-cellular test systems. And I think the future is the T cells and the cytokine profiles. That will be the test future, not the antibodies. We will leave the antibody way in a few years, let's say 5 up to 10 years. It's few years in laboratory. The ELISpot actually is available for Borrelia burgdorferi, for all 3 subspecies, for chlamydia and trachomatis and pneumoniae, and Ehrlichia infections, Yersinia infections, EBV infections, and CMV infections. What about the CD57 count? CD57 count, very interesting. It belongs to the natural killer cells, and the reduction indicates chronic activity of Lyme disease. We have a reference range around 100, 130 per microliter. This is an example. I cannot go into deep. I measure a lot of this CD57 count. It's a standardized flow cytometry. It's not so cheap to buy. And in this patient case, we have 68 per microliter. So you could say the CD57 cell count is an indication for a chronic immune suppressive situation caused by Borrelia, maybe some other bacteria, chlamydia, viruses, we don't know. We need studies about that. But CD57 count, if it's low, you can tell the patient you suffer longer than 1 year from by the symptoms, and it's a chronic inflammatory process, and the lower, the worse is the patient. Believe me, that's absolutely the truth. And you have longer than 1 year, and these patients all have pain. That you could say also. There's a little literature about this. A paper was done by Stricker now 13 years ago. We need more studies, but more are coming from Italian groups. We need more studies, I'm sure for that. The next point is the basic diagnostic test for chronic Lyme borreliosis. You should do the immunoplot. You don't do the ELISA. Don't trust your ELISA. That's a very important slide, so please spread it around the world. You need the ELISpot test for the recent activity. you need the CD57 count for the chronic activity. That makes sense to do both. And you have to monitor a patient. Nobody monitors a patient. They always send away from the hospitals. Go home patient, 2 weeks doxycycline, 2 weeks rocephin, go home. But there's no control. If you suffer from cancer, you will be monitored by a staging process. You do tumor marker antigens. Why not in Lyme disease? I cannot understand this. If somebody helped me by explanation, it's a staging. Like in HIV model, you do CD56, you look by PCR. You don't take the patient serious. They are looking all pretty well. I think many of you have some problems, but you're all looking pretty well. I cannot look into your face. Do you suffer from Lyme disease or not? Or are you depressive or do you have Alzheimer's? I cannot decide by your face. But if you suffer from cancer, you're not looking pretty well by chemotherapies. I want to present you now a new method, very important in my eyes for the future. It's the Lipodens. It's a rapid single-step ultracentrifugation method for the determination of lipoprotein subfractions. I believe chlamydia infections, Borrelia, and other infections can induce atherosclerosis. Because many of the Lyme patients, if you ask them, they develop secondary hypercholesterolemia and hypertriglyceridemia. If you ask them, it started with infection, chlamydia, we all know the correlation maybe. I've not developed, it was developed by a colleague, a new method for this, and you look for this small dense LDL. These are the dangerous LDL, and the HDL, the high density lipoproteins, they are the good ones. So the more you have here, the better for a patient. The less you have here, maybe good, but you come from a lower level. But you see here, this is the LDL3 subfraction, and this means a high risk for atherosclerosis, whereas the HDL2 subfraction is very, very good for you, protective character. This is a new method, and I think we leave the next years more and more this cholesterol quantification up to these new methods. We have to split it off. And this is an example for a patient. This patient had a very high level for LDL3. It was 57. And after successful therapy and change of lifestyle, this Lipodens test showed a significant decrease, and the patient had a very low risk for atherosclerosis. This monitoring also belongs to your A, O, and M group, I think. So now I want to do a small excursus. Sources. You say, Armin, your laboratory, you did the mistake with the patient sample, but that's not true. 62% of the mistakes were done in the pre-analytics. So pre-analytics is 62% quality of laboratory test. Pre-analytics means case taking, the selection of the samples, the sampling, processing, the transport. 15% of the mistakes were done in Armin's laboratory, just 15%. 62% is you're responsible taking the blood or naturopath, or everybody does the mistake, not Armin in this case. And 23% were post-analytics. Also some mistakes could be done by mixing up some patients' names. I don't know. But the analysis is very strong regulated everywhere around the world. We don't do many mistakes, but therefore I want to discuss a little bit with you a little later. Just a minute. It's going. Next slide. Okay, now it's going. So why is it so important to go back? First, you start with a serum tube. You take a serum tube. It's very important which tube you use first. Serum. First, write down, doctors first use serum tube. Second, you use the CPT tube for the LTT if you want to do it. It's a second tube you use. The third tube you use is the heparin tube. It's for the flow cytometry. And the last tube you take is the EDTA tube. What about coagulation tube? Professor Puri, what would be your choice for coagulation tube? It's on position 1. It's the best to take it very quickly because you can activate some thrombolytic factors and some coagulation factors in the tissue. So the coagulation tube should be on position 1 if you want to do some coagulation time, for example. Very important, please, the serum tube, keep it upright. Don't do it in a lying position. That's very bad for the material. You see, the laboratory has big problems. Also, my laboratory, if you don't keep it upright after taking blood, the serum will do this way, and so difficult also the hemolysis. So what would be the best? You shake all tubes carefully 5 up to 10 times after taking blood. That's a pre-analytic short course for you. 5 to 10 times. You put all blood samples in upright position for 30 minutes. No centrifugation at the beginning. No, for my LTT, don't centrifuge them. Don't you kill all the cells in it. So I can throw all the material away. That belongs to the 60%, for example. Store at room temperature, not in the sun. Don't put it into the sun. Very dangerous. No refrigerator. No cooling of all tubes. And protect all tubes in the right transportation. Otherwise, it's also dangerous for the logistics if you have some driver picking up your samples. Yeah, and that's the end of part 1. Thank you very much for your attendance here, and we can discuss later.
Thank you very much. We're going to have a short break now, 15 minutes. I want to draw your attention to the fact